Welcome to the Usher training video. The purpose of this video is to instruct you on some practical know-how on how to do ushering here at Calvary Chapel, Fort Lauderdale. The position is one of authority. It's one that requires a humble yet strong hand. And I trust that you'll be blessed as you see and hear our hearts as to what we would like to have happen in the sanctuary with our ushering team. So what we would like to do is start with opening our Bibles. And in 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 7 through 10, and I'll read, "The end of all things is at hand. Therefore be of sound judgment and sober in spirit for the purpose of prayer. And above all things have fervent love for one another. For love will cover a multitude of sins. Be hospitable to one another without grumbling. As each one has received a gift, minister it to one another as good stewards of the manifold grace of God." Now, there's a few things that we'd like to talk about there. And number one, that it talks about having good sound judgment. All right, so when you are serving in the house of the Lord, you have to remember, number one, you represent Jesus Christ. And how do you do that? How do you represent Jesus Christ? Well, I think of Galatians 5:22, and to be filled with the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, gentleness, kindness, long-suffering, self-control. Against these things there is no law. These things should be evident and manifest in your life if you're going to accurately reflect Jesus Christ. So pray about those things, and if you're short on patience on a given day, ask Him for it, and He'll give it to you. The second thing that you need to constantly have in the back of your mind, that I represent Calvary Chapel. Now, what does that mean? How do I represent Calvary Chapel? We have a statement of faith that you can get online, and I would recommend that everybody check that out. You can go right onto our website and download the statement of faith and look through it. Make sure that you actually agree with the major tenets of our faith, so that when you put a sticker on that says, "I volunteer here and I serve here," you're representing Jesus Christ, but you're also representing Calvary Chapel in that the things that we believe, the basic tenets of our faith, that you agree with those things. So second, it says to have fervent love for one another. So it's talking about Christians within the church, that you should have fervent love for one another. Think about that kind of love, that the people that come through that door and are now coming to church, you should greet them with fervent love, strong love. That's our command from Peter as he talks about how to love others in the church. Okay? So the last one, or the next thing I wanted to talk about, is be hospitable without complaint. Okay? Be hospitable without grumbling. So we are in the hospitality ministry. And when we think hospitality, what do we think about? Do we think Disney? Do we think Marriott? These places that are making a lot of money who write books on hospitality? No, I think if we're going to do true godly hospitality, the church should be writing the book on what hospitality means. We should go above and beyond excellent 5-star hospitality. As people are coming into church, we should be able to think outside the box to figure out how we can make people's church experience an excellent one that they'll never forget. Okay, and finally, it says as you receive a gift, minister it to one another as good stewards in the manifold grace of God. Now, you've been given a gift. You've been given a gift of authority. You've been given a gift, a calling to be an usher at Calvary Chapel. So now that you have that gift, you should be able to give that gift to others. You should be able to serve others with that gift. It's not about self-service, it's about other service. So let's just keep those things in the forefronts of our minds as we serve. The next thing we're going to talk about is, what is an usher? So you're here, you're an usher. Movie theaters have ushers, but what sets you apart? What sets you apart is that we are providing a distraction-free learning environment in the house of God. What does that mean? That means that you are going to be in a position of authority. You have been given authority. Now, that's not authority that you're going to take lightly and to abuse. Instead, it's authority in which you're going to practice with humility. As you keep a distraction-free sanctuary, please let the love of God flow through you to the people that you're instructing, so that not only are we keeping a distraction-free sanctuary, but we're also showing every single person that comes here, we love you with a God-like love. So who is an usher? Or who can be an usher? Well, the usher shouldn't be somebody who's brand new to the faith, because you're being given a position of authority in the church to direct and lead the flock as they come to church. So you shouldn't be a novice, as the Bible says. So we're not legalistic as to how long you must be a Christian before you become an usher. So if you feel that you're called to this position, you should probably get with your elder, overseer in your interview, and he might ask you to go to Christianity 101 if you've only been saved for a few months before you would take a role such as this. Some other things that should be present in the life of an usher is good hygiene. I mean, if you're coming here and you're supposed to be a fragrance of the Lord, let's not let the fragrance of our flesh offend others. Make sure that you're showering, brushing your teeth, give yourself a breath check. Take a mint if you need to, but we're going to make sure that our flesh is not offending people in any way, including hygienically. What else? Your dress code, your attire should be presentable. I think about it like this. If I'm going to go to get a cheeseburger at a restaurant, I get a guy that comes to me and serves me a cheeseburger with a tie on. Well, we're not saying you need to wear a tie, but we are asking that you would contemplate and think about what you're wearing and make sure that you are indeed presentable. Definitely pants are required for an usher. If you're going to wear slacks, that's great. If it's jeans, they can't be ripped. We need to make sure that we look presentable. Long sleeves would be wonderful. Collar, those things are all nice. A tie is great too. So just think about those things as you're getting dressed to come in to serve, that you are looking presentable as you're serving here in the house of the Lord. In preparation for serving, there's a few things that you should definitely think about. Number one, be prayed up. The best weapon that you have against the enemy is prayer. We want to be filled with the Holy Spirit afresh each and every day as we're serving the Lord, so that we can see with His eyes and hear with His ears. The people need love. They need godly love. And if I'm not prayed up, then I'm only going to be as good as I can be, which isn't very good. We need Jesus' help. Some other things that we'll be looking for in the role of an usher would be that you're taking care of yourself spiritually. Yeah, we talked about praying. Hopefully you're doing your devotions, but we want to make sure that while you're serving at one service, we're hoping and praying that you're sitting in and getting filled at another service. I heard a wise man once say, if somebody asks me for $5 and I don't have it in my pocket, I can't give it to you. So please come on in, get filled with the Holy Spirit so that you can give it to others. We also have doctrinal training classes monthly that you're invited to come to. Ask us about it. Ask your elder about how do you get part of that, plugged into being part of that doctrinal training class. Because let's face it, in the role of an usher, you're in a role of authority. You're going to face different doctrinal challenges perhaps at times, and it would be wonderful if you are prepared to give an answer when you're faced with a different idea or a different expression of faith. So that's another thing that we have available for you. So now you're ready to serve, and you've been interviewed. You're now being invited to a pre-service meeting. So by attending these meetings, you get brought up to speed on the latest and greatest with what's happening in the hospitality ministry as we attempt to serve the Lord by serving others in the house of God. So what are some other things to do prior to the beginning time of the service you're serving at? Well, number one, you're going to pray up with your team. You might go break out from your pre-service meeting for a time of instruction and information, and even further prayer with your team leader. So when that happens, that's great. Connect with those people, and then you're going to be dismissed to your aisle or your section. So when you do that, there might be a few things to think about to prepare the sanctuary for church for the upcoming congregation. Number one, we want to do a sweep of the bathrooms. This is your responsibility. Go in the bathrooms, make sure that they are presentable for the body as they're coming into church. If there's tissue that needs to be replaced, either replace it yourself or make sure you get a hold of somebody that can. Make sure that the bathrooms look nice and presentable, so when people come to church, they have a nice clean place to be. Next thing, make sure that the Bible shelves are stocked. sometimes we go through a lot of Bibles here at Calvary Chapel, and there's shelves in the back of the sanctuary that are filled with Bibles, and sometimes those shelves get depleted. Make sure you check the Bibles in your section and make sure that those shelves are full with Bibles so that when it's time to pass out Bibles, we have Bibles to pass out. Wouldn't that be nice? All right. Now, we're going to make sure if you are in certain sections in the sanctuary, you may be asked to put up ropes that will block certain areas of the sanctuary so that we ask people to sit in the center, and then as the sanctuary fills, then we'll take the ropes down. Those are all things that you can do to prepare. There's tithe envelopes that go in certain slots. You make sure that those are in place. If there's tissue boxes, that you don't see any tissue boxes, you can just make sure that the sanctuary looks nice and neat. Do a sweep of your section. You can look through the seats of your section, make sure that there's nothing left behind, no personal items that you could bring to Lost and Found if possible, or if there's any trash or things that people discarded there in your section, make sure you pick it up so that the sanctuary looks in order and people can go to church and not have to see those things. So service is almost going to start. It's about to begin. Make sure that before you report to your aisle, if it's a communion weekend, make sure you go and get your assignment from your elder overseer prior to reporting to your aisle. We're going to talk more about communion in a few minutes, but for now, just make sure that before you get into your aisle, you get your communion sheet and that you go and check in and get your badge that you put on because we want to make sure that the people that you're approaching can clearly see your name and can clearly see that you're officially and representing the church. Be flexible because remember, everything at Calvary Chapel changes eventually, and you may be serving in one aisle week after week, but one day your overseer might come and say, hey, we have a need in overflow, or we have a need in the cafeteria. So make sure that if that happens, that remember what 1 Peter 4 said. It said to provide hospitality without grumbling. Just make sure that you have a happy and joyful heart, and wherever that need is, that you're willing and joyful to go ahead and meet that need. So now people are entering the sanctuary, and you're going to now fill the sanctuary from the front to the back. And we're going to try to make sure that the front seats and this section up here in the front gets filled first so that latecomers will have a place to sit in the back. A very important thing to remember is that once a pastor has begun to speak from the pulpit, that we don't seat anybody in front of these poles that are behind me. We affectionately call that the no-fly zone. You might hear that term. We want to make sure that anybody who comes in late, we're going to sit them towards the back so that we're not bringing people up front, disturbing the pastor as he's speaking. We don't want to disturb the people as they're listening. And it would just be better for keeping an orderly sanctuary. So on the topic of keeping an orderly sanctuary, one very holy moment to keep in mind is whenever the pastor's praying. So whenever you hear the pastors begin to pray, stop whatever you're doing, and if somebody's coming up the aisle, quietly ask them to stop too, so that we're all standing quietly in a reverent position, not disturbing everybody around us as the pastor's praying. Very, very important. So after worship is over, one of the first things that you're going to be asked to do is to distribute Bibles. And this is a very key time for the usher during a church service, because pastor is going to call for the ushers and deacons to come forward to distribute Bibles. So one thing I want everybody to remember, always look at the usher in the center aisle. That center usher is going to begin to walk forward with a stack of about 12 or 13 Bibles, and typically there's a Spanish one on the bottom. So if you have somebody who asks for a Spanish Bible, you have it right there in your hand, and you'll be able to give that Bible to them. But you're going to walk forward, not passing out Bibles on the way to the front of the sanctuary, but everybody go to the front of the sanctuary together. And once everybody is set in the front of the sanctuary and turned around, then the center aisle usher then begins moving back towards the back of the sanctuary and giving a Bible to everybody who has got their hands raised. If we can all do this uniformly, it just looks professional, it looks good. So let's please make sure that we take that time of the service very seriously. One thing that we want to never, ever, ever, ever do is be a distraction. So why do people come to church? People come to church to worship God. As people are singing They're worshiping God. They have their hands raised, and they're literally in communion with the living God. So if you're going to be seating people and there's somebody standing there with their hands raised and their eyes closed and they're worshiping the Lord, never, ever tap them on the shoulder because there's a seat next to them so that somebody can get into that seat and disturb that moment of worship. We want to make sure that that never happens. I mean, really, if God was visible, which He's not, He's invisible, but if He were visible and this person were communicating to God right in front of them, nobody in their right mind would interrupt them just because there's a empty seat next to them. So let's keep that in the forefronts of our minds as we're doing ushering and we are bringing people to a seat, that we're not interrupting anybody in worship, anybody in prayer. If somebody's very studious in their notes, we want to make sure that we're not disturbing those folks and causing a disturbance so that people's attention is not being brought off of God and onto the thing that which we're doing. Another way that you can be a distraction as you're doing ushering is when you're communicating to the other ushers on your team. So if you have 2 seats here in your section and another usher is bringing people in, how do you let them know you have 2 seats? They can send people to you. We want to make sure that we keep all of our communications with our hands inside the frame of your body. So I'd let my usher team know by doing this too. I'm showing them 2 fingers. If I'm doing this, I have 2 fingers and I'm waving them this way. I'm acting more like air traffic control rather than being an usher. When I'm waving and flailing my arms everywhere, it's bringing people's attention off of God and onto me and what I'm doing, and we never want to do that. So as you're communicating, make eye contact. It's very important. Your hand gestures be inside your body. If I'm going to call for somebody, I can do this so that the people around me aren't being distracted by what I'm doing and where I'm going and how I'm walking and so on. Make sure that you're never running in the sanctuary hallways or in the aisles. Very important that as you walk and as you're traveling from one place in the sanctuary to another, that you're doing so in a reverent manner. Okay, it's a big word, right? That's a $3 Christianese word. Look it up. It's a very important word. We should all have reverence for whatever we're doing in the sanctuary. And that sense of reverence is basically having a sense of respect for what God is doing in the hearts of the people here. So nothing that I do should interfere with somebody's attention to God. And how is an easy way that I can interfere with that is, how am I dressed? We want to make sure that however you're dressed, however you look, that you're cognizant of the fact that is what I'm wearing taking attention off of God and onto me. I don't want to be dressed really loud with loud colors or flashy clothing items. Anything that I do that brings attention onto me as an usher is probably not a good idea. So just make sure as you're getting dressed before you come in to serve that you're keeping these things in mind. So another important thing to remember as an usher, as you're leading people to and from their seats, never, ever, ever touch somebody, okay? Some people are very sensitive about being touched, and that's just something that we should always avoid at all costs. Never put your hand on somebody for any reason. So if you're going to encourage them to come, you can ask them, use your words, but never touch them. One of the greatest challenges that you're going to face as an usher is going to be this. Mid-message, and somebody from right up in the front gets up out of their seat and leaves the sanctuary to go to the bathroom. Now, it's a difficult thing, but we want to make sure that we're not just bringing people to and from their seats. It's a learning environment. So if it was just open for everybody to kind of walk around as they wish, then there would be distraction after distraction after distraction, and it wouldn't be conducive to learning. So our job is to make sure that we are keeping that no-fly zone that we talked about up there free from people walking around to the best of our ability. So here's what we do. Somebody gets up from the front, it's in the middle of the message, they're walking out, they leave the sanctuary. The best thing to do is to exit the sanctuary with them in the back and let them know, hey, when you come back in, we may ask you to sit in the back if that's okay. Now you're going to have the conversation with them outside in the hallway so that we're not distracting what's going on in the sanctuary. So then they come back into the sanctuary after going to the bathroom, and what you want to do is lead them. Remember, you're being given a position of authority. If you can just, hey, come follow me, sit right here, and let them know that you're on their team. You want to get them back up to their seat if you can, but it may be a little while. You're going to ask them, hey, do me a favor, wait until a Bible verse, and then I'll take you forward. So we're not just going to let people come and go as they want. You're going to direct them, and at an appropriate moment, such as when the whole church body is looking down at their Bibles, then you bring them back up to their seat. But if it's right in the front row, it might not hurt to just ask them to remain in the back for the rest of the service. If they have personal items or their family's up front and they're getting angry, they're getting agitated, then that's the point at which you bring them back. Now, here's the thing. It's up to you to discern when you would take somebody up in the middle of a message. I mean, we'll probably hear about it if you do, but if you're going to err on this topic, make sure that you err on the side of grace, and we would rather be guilty of being too gracious than being too legalistic. So please keep that in your minds. As an usher, you should also have sort of a security mindset. I mean, let's face it, in the world we live in today, Christianity has enemies, and we as ushers are the people that are here in and amongst the congregation during church that can give and play that security role. So that doesn't mean you have to go tackling people, but what it does mean is that you can just think and observe, and in your section especially, just look at who's there. Watch, be observant. Ask God, the Holy Spirit, to guide you and direct you. And if there's anything that you see that just looks a little different, a little odd, maybe even inappropriate, it is your responsibility to make sure that that gets handled. Pastor Fidel says it best. He says that if anything happens here on this property, it's because we're letting it happen. So if you see something that you know isn't right, you know shouldn't be happening at church, handle it. If with love, with grace, with the fruit of the Spirit, like we talked about. But if it's above your head, we have an amazing security team called the gatekeepers that are here on property, and they have a phone number, a cell phone that they hold in their hands, and there's somebody here at every church service, and I'm going to encourage every single usher to plug this phone number into your phones so that if you need to call our church security phone number, you have it readily available. That number is 954-319-7676. So please, if you need that assistance, that security assistance, don't hesitate to contact those folks. In a sanctuary full of 2,000 or 3,000 people, you're going to be bound to find that there's some people here that, well, we call them God's special people. So it's our responsibility to love on them because they need God's love. They need the love of Christ. So first and foremost, we need to have our minister's hat on. But those challenging folks at times can be a distraction, and we can't allow the distractions of challenging people to distract 2,000 or 3,000 people from listening to a service. So it is your responsibility. If somebody's making noise, talking too loudly, I mean, every once in a while we have somebody from a different background maybe get up and speak in tongues in a service. It's your responsibility to address that. Make sure that you're approaching with gentleness and kindness and self-control. Remember, fruit of the Spirit. But you're going to let that person know, hey, would you mind just kind of keeping it down because, you know, there's other people here that are trying to listen to the message. If they don't seem like they're understanding or comprehending what you're saying, and maybe they're getting agitated, make sure you get your elder. Another thing that's not allowed in the sanctuary is food. We don't allow people to bring food into the sanctuary, but here's the thing. How do we communicate that? We don't say, you're not allowed to bring food in the sanctuary, or no, you can't. Or even when it comes to bringing people back up to their seats, we don't use the word no. We don't use the word you can't. Instead of focusing on a negative and what people can't do, we always tend to focus on a positive, things that they can do. If you find somebody that has brought food into the sanctuary, maybe they slipped it by the greeters, and you see that they have a shrimp scampi leftovers from the grill or something, okay, there's an aroma that's going to be there that's going to be a distraction. So we're going to go to that person, again, with gentleness and kindness, and we're going to say, sir, ma'am, would you mind taking your food and either bringing it to your car or discarding it outside so that we don't have the smell of your food in the sanctuary? Let them know what they can do. Give them options, okay, instead of focusing on what they can't do. Another thing you might see, whenever there's thousands of people in one place at one time, there's going to be entrepreneurs that want to promote their business or even promote their ministry, and it's going to happen at church. So you might see some business cards coming out, or flyers, or handouts, or whatever it might be. That's not something that we want to see happen here. So if you see that, you go up to them, you tell them, hi sir, thank you so much for your interest here, but we're going to ask that you not hand out anything unless it's approved by our Calvary Chapel communications team. Sometimes they may or may not agree with you, or they might be challenged by that. But in that case, again, get your elder involved, but you have the authority to make sure that people aren't just passing stuff out here, because we don't know what they're passing out. Another challenge you might face is when somebody's bringing an animal into the sanctuary. Okay, well, we don't allow pets into the sanctuary. I mean, people have allergies, people have phobias of animals, so that's not something that we want to have happen. So we can graciously tell somebody who's bringing their pet inside the sanctuary, excuse me, ma'am, would you mind returning after you've secured your pet somewhere else, okay? Again, focusing on what they can do instead of you can't, you're not allowed. We don't use that language. But one thing that you may face, and you probably will, is a service dog. So if somebody has an animal that's been prescribed by a physician of some sort, they have a service dog, that animal is allowed in by law anywhere that a normal civilian would be. So if you say, excuse me, ma'am, is this your pet? She says, well, it's a service dog. Then you would just say to them, thank you so much. You're not even really legally allowed to ask them to show any kind of proof. So if somebody references a service dog, that the animal being referenced as a service dog, just let them in. It's okay, and church will happen anyway. Another thing that's bound to happen when you're in a building full of thousands of people is an emergency or a health issue of some sort. Well, if you are ushering and you have somebody in your section that seems to have a health challenge, make sure you know where the medical supply bag is located in the information booth out in the lobby. If somebody needs some basic medical attention, a Band-Aid or something along those lines, we can provide that for them. However, if you perceive that somebody's having a serious health problem, they're dizzy, they're feeling faint, sometimes people do indeed pass out right in church services. We have that happen every so often. Make sure that you call the paramedics. Call 911, then contact your overseers via radio. We want to make sure that if somebody's having a serious health issue, that we get the right people, the paramedics, here to address that as soon as possible. So go ahead and dial 911 in that case. Another thing to think about is in the case of an emergency. Now, we're not going to go through our roles and responsibilities in case there's a fire alarm right now in this video. Your elder overseers are equipped and ready to train you and instruct you as to what your roles and responsibilities are in the event that there was an alarm. So make sure that you go to them and ask them, hey, if there was a fire alarm, what would I do? And that they would give you instructions, because if you're going to be in the aisle here doing the ushering, we should know what we're supposed to do in the advent of an alarm. So now, service is coming to an end. Typically, at the end of service, if we're not doing communion, there's an altar call. And one thing that we want to protect with all of our hearts is the holy nature of the altar call. So people are being wooed by the Holy Spirit to come forward and give their lives to Christ. This is a spiritual moment in which the enemy hates. So the enemy is going to be hard at work trying to distract during that time. So that is a time that you can be a little extra forceful on people that want to return to their seats up in the front. We're not letting them up. We're not bringing people back up to the front. We're going to ask them to wait until after service. We can tell them service is almost over and ask them to sit in the back. And then after service is over, they're welcome to go up to the front and rejoin their loved ones. So service is over. What we want to do now is want to finish our service well. And there's a few options at this time as to what you can do. First and foremost, if there's a large altar call, we need new believer encouragers to go back there, and we want to have one-on-one attention, guys with guys and gals with gals, praying for new believers in the new believers room. So that's going to be something that if you're interested in, I'm going to ask that everybody pray about their involvement in the new believers room. So if you're interested in being a new believer encourager, go online and sign up to serve. If you're not encouraging new believers at the end of the service, please, as the congregation's leaving the sanctuary, go ahead and exit greet them. Just wish them a good day. God bless you. See you next week. You can do that. And then after the congregation leaves the sanctuary, please do a sweep of your section one more time. Make sure that all trash is picked up off the floor. And this is a time when there's a lot of personal items that get left behind, and you can go ahead and collect those personal items. Go ahead and bring them out into the lobby and to the lost and found out there so that people can reclaim their items. One more thing to think about. Whenever we have a special event here at Calvary Chapel, whether it be Easter services, Good Friday, Christmas, stadium services, whether it be a concert, whether it be a men's conference, whether it be a women's conference, whatever it might be, we're always looking to put together a volunteer team to service those events. Even baptisms, that's our ministry. So when you're at your pre-service meetings, you become aware of events that are happening that are out of the norm for your service. Pray about that, because that's our ministry. We want to make sure that those services are adequately manned and that we're loving on the body appropriately and efficiently at those services. Pray about it. You're not required to do so, but we are asking that you would pray about your involvement. I'll never forget the first time that somebody asked me to serve communion. I couldn't believe it, so I said, sure. And I went back, I got my trays, and I couldn't help but become emotional as I'm serving the body and blood of Christ to the body during a communion service. So at the end of each month, this is what we do. And as an usher, your responsibility is to make sure that we are properly serving communion to the body. So now, what does that mean? That means before each service starts, before that communion service starts, that you would contact your elder overseer, make sure you get an assignment. It's going to be a piece of paper that looks something like this, okay? And it's going to state which section you are going to serve. And it's going to tell you the section number up here on the top, and it's also going to tell you how many trays you're supposed to collect and bring out to serve the body in that section. And it's going to even tell you what direction to take as you enter the sanctuary so that we're all in one accord. It's going to be very important that you know who your partner is and that you guys are communicating to one another as you're serving your elements. So we want to make sure that we're in place and prepared at the right time early enough so that we're not rushing to serve our elements. So when that service begins, let's say it's the Sunday 11 a.m. service, we want to make sure that you've made your way back to the communion hallway 1 hour after the starting point of that service. So if it's the 11 o'clock service, at 12 o'clock, you should be back in that hallway with your trays in hand. So now, remember, this is a really holy moment when the body is reflecting on their sin and their sin's relationship to Christ's death on the cross and how His death paid for their sins. We're taking in remembrance of Him. So this time is, again, a time that the enemy wants to use distractions to pull people's attention off of Christ and onto whatever it is you're doing. So as you're making your way to the communion hallway to get your trays, and even as you're back there, you're going to see your friends and your fellow ushers and servants. Make sure that this is not a social hour. Make sure that this is a holy hour and that we're back there, that we're quiet and that we're reverent, quietly holding our trays. We shouldn't be walking out into the body, into the congregation to serve the elements as He's describing communion. We wait until He's done. He gives a very clear cue at the end when He's done and He's ready for the elements to be distributed. He says, ushers, deacons, come on forward, and He'll say something along those lines. We want to make sure that He's done with His message completely so that we're not distracting Him as He's speaking. So you're probably going to have an overseer, an elder, a deacon, somebody along those lines who's going to give you a cue as to when to begin to walk out to serve the elements. Now, you're going to have your partner with you, and you're going to have communicated with your partner who is going to start serving that section speaking. So section 105, you're going to be on one side of the section, your partner's going to be on the other. You're going to establish before you go out, hey, if I have 2 trays in my hand, I'm going to serve the first 2 rows. Your partner will serve the 3rd and 4th rows, and then you're going to be making eye contact and making sure that you're watching what your partner's doing so that you're not sending a tray from one side of the aisle and he's sending a tray from the other side, and now you got an aisle with 2 trays and the people are confused. So you're going to, if we're serving first, we're going to serve rows 1 and 2. Your partner will serve rows 3 and 4. You're going to wait at row 3 and 4 for his trays, and then collect his trays, then bring them to the next 2 rows, perhaps rows 5 and 6, and begin distributing again. So it's very important as you and your partner are serving your section's communion that you're paying attention to the people in your section, making sure that everybody has received their elements. So you don't want to leave your section before everybody has their elements, and you got to make sure that all your trays have been collected as well. So in eye contact with your partner, very key, communicating with him, maybe with subtle hand gestures or just making some good eye contact, it helps. And then once you're done serving, then you're going to exit the sanctuary going towards the back. If you're all the way on the east side, you have to bring your trays all the way across the sanctuary. We're not going to ask that you go through the middle of the sanctuary to return to the communion hallway. We're going to ask that you exit the sanctuary on the east side, go through the sanctuary lobby, and then return into the communion hallway through the west rear entrance, okay? As you're serving your elements, if you have a problem with one of your trays, let's say you notice that there's no matzah crackers in your communion tray. Sometimes it happens. We have a couple of people called floaters that don't have an actual assignment. They actually have a couple trays and they're on standby waiting to see if there's any kind of challenges. If you discover that your trays are lacking elements for any reason, you can just raise your hand. Your floater on your side is going to be looking for people that might be in trouble, that might be in need, and they'll come and meet your need and make sure you have the elements you need to serve the body. Also, as you're returning, let's say you're serving in the center or on the west side, we don't want you to go out the rear doors there because you're just going to wind up making more noise, and that would be more of a distraction. So you're going to go ahead and cut across the sanctuary in the back, going along the back wall so that you're not disturbing anybody. We never walk along the no-fly zone, which is this big aisle that cuts through behind the poles in the middle of the sanctuary. We never return to the communion hallway using the no-fly zone. We always go to the back of the sanctuary. We go along the back wall and enter the communion hallway there. Now, once you return to the communion hallway, remember, there's another service that's starting in like a half an hour that they need full trays full of communion elements. It is imperative that all of our communion servants at least consolidate the trays that they have and maybe fill up the cups and fill up the matzah on their 4 or 5 trays. And many hands make light work, so that if we have 30 or 40 guys that each take a couple of trays and make sure that their 3 or 4 trays are set for the next service, then we're going to have a very quick and easy turnaround so that the next service will be ready to serve the body as well. Also, if you're serving at the 1 p.m. service on a Sunday or at the last service on a Sunday, something interesting happens. We actually have to wash 175 communion trays. So we have a little team of volunteers that meets in the loading dock in the back near the communion hallway, and they have a hose and they sit there and they wash all the trays. It would be a tremendous blessing if you could dedicate 15, 20, 30 minutes at the end of that service once a month to help them clean up the trays and wipe them down so that they're ready for next month. Communion is an awesome time, one which we reflect on what Christ did for us on the cross. So serving communion to the body, it's a real privilege and a real honor. And we want to thank you for your time and your commitment to making communion weekends special and holy for the body here at Calvary Chapel, Fort Lauderdale. We weren't able to cover everything that's involved. There's going to be a lot of things that weren't covered. You're going to have questions. Make sure that you feel the freedom to come to us. Go to your elder overseer and they'll be able to answer all your questions. Or you can email us at hospitality@calvaryftl.org and we'll be able to answer all of your questions there. Again, thank you so much for your interest in serving, and God bless.